Friends, welcome to Trenton Meetinghouse. Charles, say a couple of things, which is we are an active meeting, which so much gets asked. Continuously meeting here since 1739, continuously meeting in Trenton since
83 or so, something like that.
Yeah. 1683, but when Madame Stacy first came here, he was a Quaker. He settled at the Polish, however, this will be, Fred also mentions all this. I'm going to leave you with only 10 minutes worth of stuff. This is Fred. He has been with me for a long time. He is an attorney and a very thorough amateur historian. As something to say, Fred Miller.
Okay, where do we start? Welcome. We love this building. We try to keep it up. It has a lot of history in it. There was an awful lot going on in 1776, right here. And since this is Patriots Week, it gives us an excuse to talk about that. And the way that I have tied it in is the fact that within Quakers, there was a huge battle verbally of do you fight or not? And if you fight, okay, what was going on among Quakers in 1776 was whether you fight or not fight, and if you're fighting, which side do you pick? And the whole basis of the Quaker religion, one of the key notes of it is to be a pacifist and not fight. And I'm going to go into the reason for that. But I'll give you a list right now of what our agenda is going to be so you can follow. First, I'm going to talk about this building, where we're in, and just the weird things about it. Then I'll go into the history of Quakerism, hopefully briefly, and bring you from the 1600s up until 1776 and to a little bit to the present day. Going in with that, I want to talk about the business structure of Quakers in the area because it's complicated. It raises questions all the time, but when you figure out how it works, it really is very simple, but the terms keep coming up, and it's worth knowing what they mean. Philadelphia yearly meeting is something that isn't what it really sounds like. But anyway, then I will bring up a couple of issues of Quakerism that really didn't involve the Revolutionary War in 1776, but it deserves to be mentioned because the Quakers had an early and strong movement to deal with Native Americans in just ways and not try to kill them or drive them off land, and even stronger, an early drive to eliminate slavery. And that was going on. It started, the first thing that I'll mention in here was in the 1750s, and then a big push around 1774. So even though it doesn't have to do with the war, it really has to be stated. Okay, when we get to 1776, I'll give you two documents. There'll be slides of one of them, and I'll read some of the other. But the opposing views, one from both from Quakers, one from the clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and one from Philemon Dickinson, who was a brigadier general in the Army under George Washington, preparing for the Battle of Trenton. And then what happened with all the split-ups we're talking about, how many people, what was going on with who was enforcing whichever side they were on. And at the end, if I have time, I'll bring in a little bit of biographies of two Trentonians who strike me as being just basically typical of what was going on. Okay. How about Quakers? The original settlement of Quakerism was when did they come over? I have to get the right year. Roughly 1677. But anyway, this building was only built in 1739. And until that time, Trentonians who were Quakers, who were going to meetings, would go to each other's houses. They had, a meeting for worship was not held in any building, but they started attending meetings for worship in Trenton around 1683 or so. The original, okay, but I'll keep the order here. 1739, they finally got the money and the permission to build the building. They had to get the permission from the larger Quaker group that they were involved with. And it's funny, there's conflicting descriptions of what was actually built. I have read somebody's history of the meeting house that was written around 1930, where she says the first meeting house was one floor. It had two long benches, and the benches pointed towards the front chairs benches, which were the seating for the elders who were in charge of the meeting. That doesn't make any sense to me. And she also says that the roof was a hip roof, which is one that would be not just the regular, two sides of a roof, but four sides, going down on all four sides. And I have no evidence of that. But I wanted to show you, well, let's show you, so you can see this is the first photograph we have of the meeting house. And what that was this square area here, from this wall to that wall, before you get into the front hall. And what happened, this was like this, and it lasted this way until 1872. And in 1872, they added this nice decorative apse. I call it an apse. And they added the foyer, the front hall. And so that it was expanded. And we do have a picture, I didn't take a picture for up here, but this is a picture of what it looked like in 1872. So it was still a lot smaller than it is now. And then it was 1893, not long after that, that they added this whole northern part. One interesting thing is when they built the 1872 part, the cellar here was just a crawl space. And when they built the 1872, they had room underneath the front hall to put a space for a furnace. And I expect it was wood. It may have been gas. No, it wouldn't have been gas. But you can see here at one point in time there was gas here as the form of light. I don't think it was ever. Actually, it was used for heat when I started attending a meeting here. They had gas heat. Anyway, you add double the size here. And an interesting thing about it is this originally, when it was built, there were pull-down walls in these sections here. There was a lots of Quaker meetings you'll find, if they're historic, they will have places that were divided into two halves, one for men, one for women. And the reason for that is not that they were worshiping separately, but they had their own meetings for business. There's the total name of that is a meeting for worship with an attention to business. So it was not a Sunday event, but a long time aspect of Quakerism was treating the women as equals of men, especially as far as preaching was concerned. So let's go on. Any questions about the building itself before I go on? Yes?
I did notice that east is that way, and asps are usually on the east end of a church. So
okay,
interesting.
Very interesting.
Oh, and I did find at our Quaker meeting, we thought that the men and women sat together at all times, but I then noticed that carvings of names are all on one half, and there isn't a carving on the other half. So I think they sat separately for a long time, even more than just at meeting for business.
Interesting. Yes?
Can you just remind me, when was Quakerism founded?
Okay, we'll get to that. That's right here.
I have a question too. What brought the Quakers to Trenton? Was it because of, like all the other religions, or was there a motive for coming to Trenton?
Well, I'll tell you how. Let's go into the history. The Quakers were here. The first people to settle the city of Trenton, the village that was here, were Quakers. And Mullen Stacy is the one who is famous for doing that. He was a miller, and he lived about 3 blocks over that direction. And the way that, the reason that Quakers came in was that, well, let's go into the history. That first map that was on here. This is a map of of New Jersey, and if you're close enough, you can see a line that runs down here from north to south across the state. And there was a very complicated arrangement here, and in this like 1660s it was, that there were the area of New Jersey was divided among, or between, excuse me, Lord Berkeley and a guy named Carteret, two famous names. My understanding of the situation was that the two of them were given the area, and it wasn't told who gets what. And what happened was it ended up that Berkeley needed money, and he wanted to sell his property, but it was never, when it was given, it wasn't decided which was his. So there was an agreement made that it would be divided in half. And they very carefully divided the New Jersey area into 10 sections and gave 5 to each of the owners. And Berkeley immediately started selling his off. And the first people he sold it to, his west half, was William Penn. Now, William Penn did not come over with that, but he bought it, he had the money, and he started sending fellow Quakers over. He was born, his father was not a Quaker. I'll give you his dates, 1644 to 1718. And his father was an admiral, Sir William Penn. But anyway, the Quakers started coming over, and the first part of America that they settled at was Burlington, right here. And Burlington became the center of Quakerism for maybe 2 or 3 years. And the next thing that happened was King George, whichever George it was, gave a lot of money not a lot of, no, what happened, his father had loaned a lot of money to the king, and a loan that was never paid back. And in return for writing off the loan, William Penn was basically given Pennsylvania, which he named after his father. So that's Pennsylvania, that's not New Jersey. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, more Quakers are buying stuff in East Jersey. Okay, land, buying areas in East Jersey. So we're getting this situation, and the way that all the Quakers started coming over, and they were settling in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was immediately expanding and growing far greater in size than what was going on in Burlington. And it was very interesting because the first bunch of years of Quakerism in the United States, the ruling of the business meetings alternated. They had a yearly meeting where once a year they'd get together, which is why we have Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And it was originally called Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, but it was meeting alternately, 1 year in Burlington and the next year in Philadelphia. Okay, but that was the yearly meeting that was basically in charge of all of the Quakers in Pennsylvania and West Jersey. And East Jersey got taken over by the New Yorkers. So that was not a part of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting.
Is that yes. Providence Line Road? Is that the road?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, if you cross Providence Line Road, there's a traffic light on it. If you're going on 206 from Trenton to Princeton, and if you follow that road, if you look at it on a map, there are bits and pieces of it that survive from up here all the way down to Ocean County. Different, for stretches of 3 or 4 or 5 miles, there's an absolutely straight road. And usually it will end with a fence, and if you look in the fence, you'll see the remnants of where the road was going. But they treated that road as the border, and that was why it was made, specifically for that purpose. Okay, going back. What about Quakerism? George Fox, the one who founded it, he was born in 1624, and in his early 20s, mid-20s, he started preaching. He was looking for something that would get him out of there was turmoil in religions, and England was basically ruled by the Anglicans, and if you had any complaints, you had no resources. And if you fought against it, there was a good chance you were going to be put into jail. But that's what he, despite this fact, he felt so moved in this that he started going around England and preaching. And there was a sect called the Seekers, that especially, there were other groups that he collected, but the Seekers were a big group that apparently, and I'm no expert on the politics involved, but looking for a leader, and George Fox was able to take over that. I'm not sure how much of the beginning Quakers was just that Seekers sect or not, but it was there. And there were ideas that he had that were really important and have lasted now. For me, the most important one is that George Fox's idea about God is that there is that of God in every person, and that we have to seek out that and treat people equally. And that was part of the principle of letting women be preachers. In other words, talk in meeting, go around and proselytize, travel around the country. But it was an essential part right there. And that led, I think, to immediately the next thing, that if there is that of God in every person, how can you kill another person? I read lots of political arguments that say that this was something that George Fox dreamed up so that he would not be put in jail for fostering revolutions. That there were sects at the time in England that were preaching that you have to overthrow the king. And Oliver Cromwell was going on at this time too. So that was definitely in there, that the Quakers in general did not want to get involved in a fight against the government of England. But that is what is the most important part of Quakerism as far as the Revolutionary War is concerned, that if you can't kill others. And it's lasted to the day. When was it, 1971, I got a draft notice. And it was my first introduction to Quakerism. And I got taught about nonviolence and arguments for it. And I didn't become a Quaker then, but it certainly stuck with me. The other big thing about Quakerism, huge thing, is that there were no ordained ministers. The idea that George Fox had was that everybody is equally entitled to speak in meeting for worship, as they were led to. And it was common for a meeting would go on for an hour and nobody would speak, and people would get up and leave, socialize and move on to the business of what was going on in the meeting and in the area. But you often, if you go to a meeting, it's not uncommon at all to get one that has 2 or 3 people in an hour speaking. Once in a while you find a meeting that's known for people speaking nonstop. It does happen. But these are not ruled out. Neither one is allowed or disallowed or encouraged or whatever, discouraged. And the other aspect, which I have to say, was the plain clothing. And you hear this going on and on about Quakers, that one thing, they refused to take their hats off in front of people who were better than them in society. This is not a 1776. This is more like 1680. This hat, but they wore hats, and they were famous for not taking off their hats when they went into court. And the judge thought they should take off their hats, and they refused to because they felt everybody was equal. And you take your hat off for God, and that's it. Okay, back to the history part. Here's Malin or Malin. I don't know how it's pronounced. Stacy Malin. Thank you. Okay, who founded here in 1679. There's the date. And the first name of Trenton was the Falls of the Delaware, because there is a very small set of rapids over here that were, they prevented boats from going any further from the Atlantic Ocean. So this is where people would go up this far and dock here at the falls. In 1719, the town was named Trent Town, later Trenton, because of William Trent, who was the landowner who bought his land from Mull and Stacy. And that was how that worked out. Let's see, what was I going to say? There was something else in here. Oh, well, it'll come back. Okay, and now I want to go into the organization of Quakers, just so you have a background. And that is, and it's strange, if you start going to Quaker meetings, that, you know, once a month they'll have a business meeting, a meeting for business. And again, if you have the full name, it's meeting for business with a meeting for worship with an attention to business. And that has that meeting on a monthly basis is a monthly meeting. That's how it gets that name. And you can be driving around and see names for Quaker meetings. There are still quite a few that the plaque will say monthly meeting of Quakers of Chesterfield or something. And the uninformed who go by think, oh, they just meet once a month. And no, they meet once a month for business. And Trenton was not where they met, at least at first. Trenton was a meeting that would collect, and this is, what did meet? Who met for the meeting for business? It was a group of meetings in an area that would get together once a month to answer the problems of their area. And I guess it made, I don't know, but that was how it was organized. It was organized that way in England. And Trenton belonged to a monthly meeting that was called Chesterfield. And it included Crosswicks and Trenton and Bordentown and East Branch, which is now no longer there, Mansfield and Princeton, Stony Brook. So those groups would meet once a month and have a meeting for business. And the next stage up in the organization was quarterly meeting. And Trenton is, Chesterfield monthly meeting was a member of Burlington quarterly meeting. And so all the monthly meetings in this area would meet once every 3 months in Burlington. And then the quarterly meetings would meet once a year in Philadelphia at the yearly meeting. And you can think for a minute, once things get too complicated, how can you run a yearly meeting if you only meet once a year? You have to have people doing the secretarial work and the organization and sorting out the finances on a regular, ongoing basis. Plus, especially concerns like if a meeting has an argument and they want to take it up to higher levels, they can take it to the monthly meeting, and then the quarterly meeting, and then the yearly meeting. And they don't have to wait though for the yearly meeting to answer questions, because there is an organization in Philadelphia called the Meeting for Suffering. And it wasn't any suffering, it was presenting arguments, pro and con, for anything that had to come to the attention of the organization. Anyway, and the reason I bring that up is there's a very important person who was clerk of the Meeting for Suffering in Philadelphia yearly meeting in 1776. Okay, back into that, what else was going on in 1776, a little bit of background. John Woolman is a famous Quaker in the middle of the 18th century, 1750 roughly, who wrote a journal, and he spent an awful lot of his time walking around the whole area, deep into Pennsylvania, working with Native Americans and trying to promote among Quakers, just treat them well, and trying to explain to the Native Americans why the Quakers were there. The big point, he also got involved in the protest against slavery, and he was adamant against slavery. And in 1750, roughly, he wrote a letter specifically to Anthony Benezet, who was a French background Quaker in Philadelphia, who in 1754, I find this striking, 1754, he persuaded Philadelphia yearly meeting to issue an epistle of caution and advice to admonish friends to seriously consider why they kept slaves and if the gains were worth it. That was the point that Quakerisms were at in 1754. And what this led to was 1774, when Philadelphia Yearly Meeting demanded of all its members that they either free their slaves or be kicked out of the membership, disowned. And in the next 5 years, there's records in Chesterfield Monthly Meeting of at least 60 slaves who were freed between 1774 and roughly 1781. So it was an idea that got hold and was being carried out 75 years earlier than the rest of the country. Well, there are other states, of course, that abolished slavery before the Civil War, but the Quakers were doing this in 1774.
Well, and I think, and I may jump in, maybe you'll talk about Benjamin Lay, but he really came over in, I think, the 30s and was pushing it, and Woolman sort of carried the torch for Benjamin Lay.
Yeah, I don't have anything about him in here. He was, the problem with Benjamin Lay was that he was not accepted at all by the whole structure of Quakerism, which, I mean, he was moved to fight, and he fought for this, but he had, as far as I can remember, he had no real success in getting anybody to say, yes, we should be listening to him.
Where's Chesterfield exactly?
Okay, Chesterfield is, it's fine. There is a town in Burlington County called Chesterfield. Is it in Burlington? I think it's still in Burlington. Yeah, and it's very funny because it's a tiny little crossroads town, and I'm not sure why it was used for the name of the monthly meeting of Chesterfield, but the big meeting, the biggest meeting in Chesterfield monthly meeting at one time was Crosswicks. And what would happen is that monthly meeting it wouldn't go to the smaller meetings. It would alternate between Trenton and Crosswicks. And when I started attending meeting here, there was a sign on the wall that said, attend Chesterfield monthly meeting here on alternate months or something like that. It was still up there. But Chesterfield, what's even more confusing is that eventually somebody started a Quaker meeting in Chesterfield, in the little town. It's a crossroads of about 8 houses. So people read about Chesterfield monthly meeting and say, how could this little tiny village have something that big going on?
I have a question. Do the Quakers have an issue with the name Trenton? Did they not like that name for a reason?
I don't think so. And I don't remember reading anything at all about that. No complaints. Yeah.
But why wouldn't they call it Trenton then? Why wouldn't they?
Well, again, it was when William Trent bought the land, it was in a time when obviously a lot of people who were coming in who were not Quakers, and the population was becoming very mixed.
But the meeting seems to have pre-existed Trent.
Yeah, like they keep calling it other names besides the Trenton.
Well, it was here before Trent, so they would have had to.
But they didn't want to adjust to that.
Because he wasn't Quaker himself, was he? He was a friend of Penn, but I don't think he was.
No, he was a Presbyterian.
He was a Presbyterian.
William Trent?
Yeah, he was not.
Oh, okay.
So was this whole area then Chesterfield at that time?
No,
Yeah.
it was Dacey's land. Is all.
Yeah, it's all just land. It's divided up with titles on it.
And was there an academy here? So, I associate the Quakers like with academics. Was there like a college or?
Not connected with the meeting. There are a bunch of schools. What was it, Charles? What was the?
Joseph Smith School was it's mentioned in a few places, and I know nothing really about it. It was under the care of this meeting, and I don't know if it was for the education of African Americans, or if it was a Quaker for the children of Quakers. And it was. I know in 1902 it existed because I've seen that date. I don't know when it was founded and where it was. Maybe down the street.
Okay. And there was a plaque that a school put on our walls just in memory of, or to commemorate one of the events of what we're coming up to. Joseph Wood, who had a school. And so that, I don't know what the connection was, except that they contributed the plaque and it was put on the wall. Okay. Okay, we have a Revolutionary War, and you have people all over, trying to decide whether to fight or not. And Quakers, the primary message that was going around was that Quakers should not fight in this. And the immediate reaction from the British is that they're not helping us, so they're enemies. And that was the other thing. The idea was don't aid either side in the fighting. And the Patriots, of course, reacted the same way. They're not aiding us, so they're our enemies. And I'll read a big thing that happened, and the date is amazing here. December 20th, 1776. John Pemberton was the clerk of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and he writes a letter to all of the meetings. He was, at that point, like I say, signs it as clerk of the Meetings for Sufferings in Philadelphia. And he was clerk of the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting at times, but I don't have that down. Anyway, his message was to tell the meetings to withstand and refuse to submit to the arbitrary injunctions and ordinances of men to join in carrying on war by imposing tests not warranted by the precepts of Christ of the laws of the happy constitution under which we and other long enjoyed tranquility and peace. We therefore exhort, admonish, and caution all who worship with us, and especially our beloved youth, to stand fast in that liberty and bear our testimony against every attempt to deprive us of it. Our profession and principles are founded on that spirit, which is contrary to and will in time put an end to all wars. That was December 20th, 1776. And what happened to John? He was among about 40 people who were a couple of months later arrested in Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia resident. And they were taken, they were arrested and they were taken down to Westminster, Virginia, where they were not put in jail, but at times they were chained up in people's houses and could not leave. And this was, of the 40 people who were charged, 20 of them were taken down, and John
Who charged them?
Yeah.
I'm sorry? They were never charged. They were never. It was
Who arrested
Yeah,
them?
like who arrested
the army.
Which one?
The Patriots,
Yeah, it was the government that did it.
Which Americans are?
Americans, yeah.
Yeah, because they refused to fight.
Yes, yeah. And so he was imprisoned, whatever, confined for 8 months down in Virginia, along with 20 other Quakers who were against the war. And now the other hand of what's going on simultaneously. Philemon Dickinson. Have I mentioned him yet? Good grief. Okay. Philemon Dickinson was a Quaker, grew up as a Quaker, moved to Trenton. The family had lots of farms and stuff in Delaware and Maryland. And he moves up to Trenton and has his own estate up here and became a lawyer. And the war comes along and he joins the militia and he makes friends with George Washington. And by December 1776, he's a brigadier general in the militia. And his house is up on, it survives. It actually one that he enlarged and completely recreated after his death. But it's on, if you go down West State Street, north along the river, about 3 miles from here, what he called the Hermitage. And it was his estate that he and his descendants built and expanded and
Was it on the corner of Lower Ferry Road, right, that one?
No, not on Lower Ferry Road. It's if you know where Hermitage Avenue is. And this is not on Hermitage Avenue. It's really weird. You go over to, I think, Colonial Street, which is like 2 little blocks south of it, and you're driving along Colonial Street, and there's this house that sits diagonally against the street. The corner of it sticks out over the sidewalk, and that's.
We used to call that the Hermitage.
Yeah, the Hermitage. That was the Hermitage. Yes.
Colonial Avenue.
Okay. Good. Okay. How about, so that's Philemon Dickinson, and moved to Trenton 1767, died in the Hermitage around 1809. And this is interesting. I found one source that says, though he was raised a Quaker and married to one, Dickinson owned slaves and defended the institution, getting into an extended and heated debate with his brother John when the latter insisted that he free his slaves. And John Dickinson was an incredibly important political force in the area at the time, even more, I think, than Philemon Dickinson. He was famous as one of the few people at the Convention of Independence in July of that, of the same year earlier, who refused to sign the Declaration of Independence. He did not. He was talking about war being too damaging, and he wasn't a Quaker, but that his father his parents had been Quakers, and his brother was, and that stuck to him, that aspect. And of course, he lost everything. And here I've been forgetting to show you other slides.
I have a question too. Would
Sure.
they participate as doctors or nurses, like medical-wise? Would they have been in the like on either side, helping out the wounded soldiers or anything like that?
I don't remember reading anything about doctors or nurses.
I know our Buckingham Friends meeting was used as a hospital, as was Plumstead meeting for the Patriots, but
Okay.
so I think they might have taken in whoever was in need.
I learned just a couple of days ago that after the first Battle of Princeton, the Quakers, it was right, Princeton Battlefield is very near the Princeton Quaker meeting.
Yeah.
And there was all Quaker community, and it was Quakers who took care of the wounded and dead from that battle, which was considerable.
Yes.
I have to say, as a member of Princeton Friends meeting, historical research now suggests that the wounded were not cared for in the
Oh,
meeting.
sorry.
They were cared for at the farm, the adjacent.
By Quakers? Is that true?
That'll be the Clark Farm.
Oh, yeah, the
Clark
The
Farm.
Clark farm. The Clarks were Quakers. It's not quite clear who volunteered to care for the wounded directly. It's believed that one of the caregivers was an enslaved woman on the Clark estate.
All right, I was misinformed.
I know, it's that story about the Quakers bringing them the wounded into the meeting house was very dear to us, but seems like it needs a little adjustment.
Thank you. Okay, and I have forgotten all about this. That's a small one. This a drawing of the original meeting house. Another angle of it, and these are, if you start looking at these, it's very confusing because it looks like there's a street running along this way, which would mean that this door was on this end. But I don't think, I think the artist was being too imaginative. This sketch was done in 1898, and it was probably based on the photograph that he'd seen. That's our meeting house from the outside, if you want to look at it. This is a picture postcard from about 1912 in its current stage. Nothing changed since then. I wanted to show this picture too. I don't know if you can really see it, but this is the one that shows one floor down here and two long benches, one here and one here, balconies going along the edges. And I think that the person who talked about that was misunderstanding. This is a London Quaker meeting. This is in the city of London. But, okay. Okay, on to, this is James Pemberton, the brother of John Pemberton that I was talking about. We don't have any pictures of John Pemberton, so I had to do with James. And here is Philemon Dickinson in full uniform. And he was later promoted to be Major General after the Battle of Trenton.
And sorry, I didn't hear, was he written out of meeting because of his
I
activity?
find no evidence whatsoever of him being written out of meeting. I looked and found nothing.
You sure he was a member of the meeting?
Oh yes, he's buried in our cemetery as a matter of fact, but there's nothing I could find that ever said he was kicked out, and plenty of stuff that said he was a member his whole life.
Do we know what the majority of Quakers decided to do during the revolution?
Not fight.
Run and hide.
Majority. There were a bunch who fought. Yes.
I beg to differ. If you look at, Major Woodward published a history of Burlington and Mercer County in 1883. In that book, he has 2 years of meeting minutes of the Crosswoods meeting and Bordentown meeting. And The two communities were only 3 miles apart. Crosswicks, every member who aided the Colonials or took up arms for the Colonials was shunned, almost without exception. Without exception.
What were they? What did they do?
They were shunned from meeting.
Shunned.
Written out of meeting.
Written out.
Written out. They used the word shunned.
Okay.
In Bordentown in December of 1776 was burned and pillaged by the British and Hessians. They were searching for Judge Borden, who was the founder of the town, and who was the brigadier general of the colonial militia. Quakers in Bordentown meeting drove wagons for the Colonials. They operated supply depots for the Colonials. They even took up arms for the Colonials, and they were exempted. They were exempted. Now, there were some in Bordentown meeting who were shunned, but for the most part, looking over the minutes for almost a year and a half during that portion of the war, Major Woodward says these Quakers were exempted.
And by that meaning allowed to fight?
They were allowed to fight, and they were not shunned or stricken from the meeting rolls.
Very interesting. Okay. I found nothing to that effect in anything I looked at, but I'll have to
Look up Major
in the
Woodward's
minutes. Yeah, in the minutes. We have a history of the Trenton meeting that shows something like 75 Chesterfield monthly meeting members who did serve in the Army. And now I have no idea how many didn't, but there was a list of a bunch of people who did. And I'm naming the ones too, and I'll name a couple more. First of all, yes?
If I may interrupt once again, and please bear with me.
Sure.
One of the most famous Quakers in Philadelphia is honored as a heroine and one of the greatest Quaker spies for the Colonial Army. Her name was Lydia Dara, and she lived in Philadelphia. Her house was opposite the house of Dr. Thomas Cadwallader, one of the richest Quakers in Philadelphia. His house had been requisitioned by General Howe. And as doing service in General Howe's headquarters, Lydia overheard plans for the British to run a raiding party outside of Valley Forge and capture George Washington. Well, she managed to take down the details of the plan, wrote it down in script in a shopping list. And when she would try to sneak out of Philadelphia, she said, "I have to go to the mill and get flour for General Howe." So they passed her through the lines. She gave the list and the information to General Washington's aide. He avoided the ambush, and General Howe was foiled. On her way back into Philadelphia, Lydia was arrested, and she was charged as a spy. And she was taken into Philadelphia, into one of the houses, and she was interrogated by a young British lieutenant, who happened to be her first cousin from Ireland, because Lydia was Irish. And so her cousin, the British lieutenant, went to his commanders and said, "This woman is totally innocent." Totally innocent, no problem whatsoever. Well, for that, the Philadelphia meeting shunned Lydia and her son for serving in the American Revolution.
Okay.
However, 10 years later, when she died, they recanted. They allowed her back into meeting posthumously. She is buried in the Quaker cemetery, and in front of her stone there is a memorial plaque. Here lies Lydia Dara, heroine of the American Revolution.
Okay. Let's talk more about Trentonians. I have an example here, earliest example I can find about disciplining members who are not protesting war enough. July and August 1775, William Plaskett and Joseph Milner, not a relation, were dismissed from Chesterfield Monthly Meeting because, quote, they obeyed the Militia Act and did not repent. What they did was paid somebody else to serve in the militia instead of themselves. And they were written out of the meeting for doing that in 1775. There are a lot of people, and there's a huge argument on how many people were doing it for business purposes, just trying to make a living, trying to work both sides. It's extremely complicated, but the message I got, at least from the written documents, is that the authorities of the Quaker, what little authority we have, but they were trying very, very hard to keep people from taking sides. Other examples. I'll get to this. Oh, that's the letter that Philemon Dickinson wrote to George Washington, December 24th, 1776. And just talking about where the troops were and everything going on. This guy, Isaac Collins, was a printer in Trenton who was trying to stay out of the war. What happened was he again paid money for somebody else to fight for him, and he also was written out of the meeting for doing that. Disowned was the term that was used. What happened to him was he moved down to Burlington, where he eventually got back into the good sight of the authorities and was admitted back. He repented his sins publicly and was taken back as a Quaker. He's buried in the Burlington Meetinghouse Cemetery. But a fascinating, and the reason I like to show this picture too is here's the plain garment of the Quaker with the jacket that has really no collar at all, no lapels certainly, no shiny buttons, no fancy ascot or anything, and wearing no hat in this picture. But anyway, we haven't even gotten to the battle. Where was it? There. Oh, that's Rahl. That's the Colonel Rahl, the German commander. And here's the whole Battle of Trenton. You can see where the troops were coming down. The Americans here and here, and they form a line here and come in here. And here, these red things are the Hessians, and they move out this way and then come down into this area. This area here is like a block over that direction out our window. And 3rd Street is this street right here. That's what this little street is here. There's a little black dot there on the corner. And this, there's no street listed here, but it was known as Quaker Street at the time. And now it's Montgomery. But it was right there, and we didn't have the addition on, but you could look out of those 3 big windows and see the orchard here that the Americans were marching through, and the Hessians were marching around. And inside the meeting was where the 20 British Dragoons were stationed and lived. And there was something, I have to say this because the Chesterfield Monthly Meeting chided Trenton. He said the Trentonians were not behaving Quakerly when they turned the key to the meeting house over to, first, the Provincial Convention, which were the Patriots, and then later to the British Dragoons, who used it as barracks. Chesterfield determined that the keys should have been denied even if it would have resulted in the doors being destroyed, as whichever group got there first and destroyed the doors. But that was in there. And I also want to mention Stacy Potts. Now, Potts is an old Trenton name, and Stacy obviously came from Mullins Stacy. And he was a tanner who lived about 3-4 blocks over there. And anecdote, Revolutionary Patriot David Lanning of Trenton was taken prisoner several days before Christmas by the British. He climbed over a fence to escape and went to the house of Stacy Potts, a Quaker and tanner whose house was being used as Colonel Rahl's headquarters. Potts risked condemnation by both sides in the conflict by refusing on religious grounds to swear allegiance to either government, but he costumed Lanning as an old woodcutter who limped out of town without being stopped. And Potts's history was he eventually moved out looking for more money, western Pennsylvania, but he got back to Trenton. I have no evidence of him being ever written out of meeting or anything, but he was elected mayor of Trenton in 1806. So, you know, one of these Trenton names that you see all the time. And we are getting really close to the 3:30, so I'm going to leave you 3 minutes for questions. I don't have a proper conclusion, except it's been a pleasure talking to you. I wish I had 2 hours. Yes.
So there's a sign for both the Declaration and the Constitution in this graveyard.
Yes.
Was he a member of the meeting? What was his position in terms of being shunned or fight? And what?
He was not a Quaker. He was not a Quaker. He was an orphan originally and was raised by his aunt and uncle who were Quakers. And he was raised as an Episcopalian.
Sorry, who was he?
George Clymer, Clymer, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in whatever it was, 1790, 1780, what was it? Anyway, the reason that he's buried, and he was a resident of Morristown, across the river, and Morrisville. I always get confused somehow, never learned. The story was that he died in Morrisville, and his son, who was married to a Quaker who belonged to this meeting, bought a grave for him here, so he could be next to his family. And there is another George Clymer, who I guess is another son, who's also buried in the cemetery here. And I was there was Cadwalladers buried here too. In fact, Dickinson, Philemon Dickinson's wife was a Cadwallader, and they were actually first cousins, but a very small community here. And she's buried next to Philemon, who's in the cemetery.
Cadwallader was a Quaker as well.
I don't remember what that. I think she was, but I don't remember. I looked all that up a while back. Yes.
Did the war affect the membership then of the Quaker community in this whole area? Was there a decline, or did it encourage people to really?
I have no idea. I think my own theory is that the revolution really shook up the religion, and was probably a long-term effect that there was a huge breakup in Quakerism around 1830. And also one thing I haven't mentioned at all was about 60 Quakers formed their own Quakerism called Free Quakers. They had their own meeting house, and they were all in favor of fighting.
In Trenton?
In Philadelphia. And they didn't have much of a long life, but the two things that happened was the split of Quakerism into Hicksite and Orthodox. And if you're interested in Trenton history, this is Hicksite. There were more Hicksites than Orthodox. The Hicksites were the liberal side. Orthodox were filing very much more centered on following the Bible, basically, at least as far as the Hicksites were concerned, what they said.
And what would be the common names like the Quakers in Trenton area? What would be the common names in the Trenton area for the Quakers at that time? You said Fox was one? Yes.
Well, Fox was never in Trenton.
Sorry?
Fox was never in Trenton.
No, Potts.
Oh, Potts.
Potts,
Yeah.
You said Potts is a big name here. What would be the other big names in that era? Like,
Oh, there's probably 30 or 40 of them.
what like famous, distinguished
I couldn't name them.
businessmen or whatever you might call people.
Yeah, I couldn't name them.
So
Yeah, the
look at all the
Tanner-
tombstones, right?
Well, there are lots in the tombstones. There's nothing that, they're common names.
Yeah,
Nothing exceptional. Yes.
Any Quakers known to fight by you or to fight for the British, to fight for the royal?
There was a case. I wrote in here, which I didn't get to, but a family, as an example. Let's see, where was it? It got left out because it was. They weren't technically living in Trenton. They were down towards Florence in that area, but a Quaker family that definitely was aiding the British and working as hard as they could under the wires to do that.
Because if anything, it benefited them because so many of the Quakers were merchants that traded with England.
Yes. Yeah.
They would have an interest to keep that connection.
Yeah. There were actually 2 Quakers who were executed by the Americans in Philadelphia, who were definitely business people who were definitely having some kind of interaction with the British. Their defenders said that they had just as much interaction with the Patriots, and that it was their enemies who were trying to get their hands on these 2 people's assets when they, forced the issue and had them executed. I mean, this is happening all the time, all over.
I'm asking, I'm sorry, I'm kind of holding this, but the graveyard outside, was it bigger at that time, or that's the size of the graveyard?
Well, if you want a big one, the Riverside Cemetery has a big Quaker thing, and I'm not sure what the...
Isn't some of the original burial ground under this?
No.
You should know.
I don't think...
There's the one grave that's right up against.
Yes. Yeah, there's a real question. But it may be that they would never be found. When they added this thing, the atrium and this wing, they put a basement in. Did I make sure of that? There's a crawl space under this square, but the L around it has a basement. So if there were graves there, they're gone. Yes.
Do you have a burial map?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we have them here.
And do you find in our burial at Buckingham, the older burials from the 1700s, they didn't bother to use headstones. It was too pompous to have a headstone. So at best there might be a rock there or something, but it's not marked, that area.
Yeah, all sorts of stories. I mean, if you look at the gravestones, they're all like about this high, most of them. Some are a little bit higher. The weirdest thing, I double-checked on Philemon Dickinson's gravestone, and it's pointing against the YWCA. So I don't know which side of it he's buried on. But lots are illegible now. We have a list of the graves from about 1935 that has a lot more names than you can read on the gravestones anymore. But most of them have originally had names on them that could be read. Yes.
Just a note about Betsy Ross, who was a Quaker. In her upstairs, she made the curtains and the furniture cushions. And downstairs, she was making munitions. So she was one of the funimicians.
Oh.
Okay.
Where did you get the skills for that? Where did you get the skills for that?
Well, I don't know.
I should.
The Cedar House, it's on Arch Street, like 400 blocks.
There is a book that's pretty new, Taking Sides in Revolutionary New Jersey, Caught in the Crossfire. And it's about the whole state, but there is a 30-page chapter on Quakers and what they were doing. And you read through that. I read through it and said, what was going on here? How can there be any pattern in this? It's just... and I think the final reaction from all of this was something that grew up in Quakerism in the 19th century called Pietism, where the Quakers became very, very isolated. It's kind of like the Amish, and continued to use plain clothing and wear funny-looking hats. And one thing that kept them from being all the way to Amish was that they had public schools that they founded to educate their kids. But the big reaction of it was to stay out of politics, not run for office, not vote, not worry, not try to get involved in governing the country. They had enough of that.
I know it's time, but when you said that the individuals were read out of meetings for even paying someone to fight for them in the Continental Army, what was the Quaker supposed to do? I mean, be arrested? I mean, what would they should be arrested?
Yes, they were supposed to be arrested and put in jail for not serving in the militia.
Because many Quakers in the 1600s were imprisoned and died from just being Quakers.
Just for me.
Yeah, George Fox was imprisoned for months, several times.
William Penn.
Yes,
William Penn also.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Was William Penn ever here in Trenton, do you know?
Well, he was across the river. I'm sure he came
Oh,
over
right,
here.
his estate was over there.
Yes. Yes.
Actually, he came here with Mullen Stacy in
Oh.
1678.
Well, he didn't settle here with Mullen Stacy.
No,
But he visited.
he bought land here, but he didn't settle.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I was starting to talk a little bit about that with that map, but very complicated situation. Anything else? We do have to make room for people coming in for the.
Thank you.
I'll just break in and say, if you want to forego time, notching and whatever,
Oh.
continue. Because we do have 4 o'clock this stage, as I mentioned to some people over here, that we were more than welcome to stay for, but we will have a little bit of setup for that. However, if there's no questions or a couple of things going ahead,
Okay.
we'll have coffee and other stuff.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.